friends and colleagues. I hope the year has started off well for each of you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your company and support throughout these past 2 months of the Truth Be Told campaign. We are definitely living through tough times where we are being asked to speak up and speak out on injustices of our world. I know it is constant. However, wherever you are and how much ever you can do, it is necessary that you do so. It is necessary to speak up on the injustices everywhere. As leaders, this is our time to be loud about the things that we care about, including freedom of all people everywhere as we continue to push for the total liberation of our living planet. Today, allow us to hold both grief of the intersectionality of injustices around the world, and at the same time, we must allow ourselves to pause and honor the work we continue to do as it relates to gender and climate justice in the Caribbean. It is incredible to see all that we were able to accomplish in only 2 months. This campaign builds on two previous conferences, the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice conferences, and this campaign pushes specifically on three objectives, such as to raise public awareness on gender and climate justice, to push and create solutions through policy advocacy, and to create visibility of women-led action across the Caribbean. In January of 2024, I am so happy to share that we were able to accomplish our goals. Through the 2 months, we were able to publish 7 blog posts from persons across the Caribbean, expanding on topics that range from Indigenous justice, links to gender-based violence, youth inclusion, and the Escazú Agreement. We collected videos of persons on the ground doing intersectional work, including M. Christie, doing work at the intersection of LGBTQ justice, Ms. Jillian Goddard, a community organizer and chocolate maker, Dr. Angelique Nixon, a scholar and professor at the University of the West Indies, Ms. Malini Allen, who continues to work and push for human rights across the Caribbean, and of course, Dr. Ayinka Grandison from Canary, who continues to believe in us and allow us in leading this work. We collected data, and at the end of this closing event, we will again ask you to fill out a quick survey. In the Caribbean, we have a long way to go in measuring the impact of our work. Collecting data through a simple survey is one way to start. You heard our opening conversation at the launch of this campaign from our esteemed panelists back in December that took place on the margins of COP28. Today, you will hear from another group of guest speakers, post-COP and post-Truth Be Told campaign. In expanding our reach, we held an art competition, and today we'll be announcing the winner. It is so very much exciting. In making this campaign even more real, we took our work to the people on the ground by holding 2 in-person meetups in Trinidad and in Guyana. This campaign builds on the CW4CJ conferences, and it is a core part of our work as co-leads on the Gender Working Group as part of the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. Through the Alliance, we were able to co-create the Caribbean Climate Justice and Resiliency Agenda 2023 to 2030. And this is an agenda and a policy document that you can use as reference to your work. Personally, I will continue to call for the full liberation of all persons around the world, and at the same time, I will continue to hold on to hope when it comes to climate action in the Caribbean. When I picture climate justice and the climate justice movement in the Caribbean, I think and I truly believe it looked like people from all walks of life coming together across borders to share their realities and solutions to the climate crisis. It looks a lot like giving people the room to speak on their realities and creating new spaces for new voices. It looks like creating communities both online and in person, and especially centering those on the front line. I think of all of us who continues to build and collaborate and who continue to push for inclusive solutions that centers not only climate justice, but feminist justice. I want to say a big thank you to Paula Joseph and Derval Bazzi for making this campaign possible. We have an incredible lineup of speakers announcing our art winner. We have so much in stores, and so I welcome Derval Bazzi to introduce the second half of our agenda.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you joined us here this evening for the campaign close of the Truth Be Told, a Caribbean call to action for climate and gender justice. The campaign is funded by the Climate Action Small Grant Facility that is offered by Canary with funding from the Open Society Foundations. We end the Truth Be Told campaign just as we started, with a fireside chat featuring a dynamic group of Caribbean women. We are so honored to create a space that amplifies the voices of women, youth, and Indigenous people, and also gives visibility to the people that are doing the work to build a resilient, sustainable, and just Caribbean. I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to hear their thoughts, their ideas, their experiences, and also their recommendations of how we can advance climate and gender justice here in the region. So it's the moment of truth. We go straight into the Truth Be Told campaign closing fireside chat right after this. From artists to activists, we united voices across the Caribbean. Together we said, truth be told. We shared the realities of the intersections of gender and climate justice. We amplified stories of resilience, of people leading the fight for a livable future. Through this campaign, it is clear to see that the solutions lie in our people. Yes, in our Caribbean people. This is not the time to accept the norm. This is the time to speak up, take action, and create the change that is needed.
Along with our partners, we have provided a roadmap of centering those most vulnerable. We collected data and we took the campaign offline. We sparked conversations and demanded a future where resiliency, inclusion, and justice are prioritized. Thanks to our incredible campaign partners and individuals who lend their support throughout this campaign. To our sponsors, Canary and the Open Society Foundations, we say a big thank you for making this campaign possible. This is only the start. Much work is needed from each one of us. You are now part of the Truth Be Told movement. Climate justice is gender justice. We encourage you to stay connected, help spread the message, and make a difference for a Caribbean that thrives.
What an incredible video and what an incredible campaign. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Truth Be Told Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for deciding to spend your evening in community with us. My name is Sapphire Alexander, and I'm a gender and climate advocate from the beautiful island of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm also the founder of a digital initiative called Caribbean Feminist, and today it is my honor and privilege to moderate this evening's conversation. This fireside chat, as would have been mentioned prior, is a part of the closing of the Truth Be Told campaign, which has been an incredible initiative spearheaded by the team at the Climate Conscious podcast, as well as the Breadfruit Collective, alongside their sponsors and partners. This campaign acts as a rallying cry, bringing us all together to explore the intersection of gender and climate justice in the Caribbean and demanding action for a just future. I know that the climate movement can be quite a bit of a boys' club. And I think for all of us who saw that initial committee for COP29, we know that it's not often that spaces like this exist, where we can learn from so many brilliant and inspiring women leaders within the climate movement. This is not something that I take lightly, and I'm extremely excited to converse with these incredible women, to learn about the work they're doing, and to hear their COP28 reflections. So without further ado, I'm honored and privileged to introduce you to our speaker for today's session. Rehanna Thomas is an Indigenous youth advocate for people's rights and social justice, who holds a bachelor's degree in social work and is currently pursuing her graduate degree in sustainable development. Hailing from Jhannel in the Upper Mazaruni District, Region 7, Rehanna Thomas excels in policy advocacy, having participated in key forums and conferences to voice the concerns of Indigenous communities and promote inclusive policies. Beyond her professional achievements, she is deeply rooted in her cultural heritage, working to preserve Indigenous languages and traditions. Committed to community empowerment, Rehanna Thomas actively contributes to initiatives focusing on capacity building and sustainable opportunities within Indigenous communities. She stands as a beacon of inspiration, embodying the resilience, strength, and cultural richness of Indigenous heritage. Our second speaker, Ms. Jhannel Tomlinson, is a PhD candidate whose research is focused on community-based adaptation to climate change. She is the co-founder of Young People for Action on Climate Change Jamaica and GirlsCARE Jamaica. She is the Caribbean advisor for the Next Gen Climate Board, sustainability lead for the JAWIC Board, the Prime Minister's Youth Awardee for Environmental Protection 2019, and was most recently listed as one of 50 youth advancing the future of food on the O5 Next list. She has represented Jamaica in Paris, Poland, Spain as a youth climate champion and will travel to Italy in September as the youth delegate for the Driving Ambition youth event. Last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Dainalyn Swaby, who is a development communication specialist operating at the nexus between climate change and culture. For over a decade, she has developed and implemented communication strategies, research and outreach projects related to climate change, agriculture, and youth engagement on a local and international level. A 2019 Chevening scholar, Dainalyn holds an MA in Global Communication and Development from Loughborough University, London. Dainalyn is a podcaster and creative writer and has produced several podcast series such as Global Yaadie and Carib Climate, as well as other works exclusively focused on climate change, culture, and sustainable development. Now that we've gotten to know our speakers, we're going to get started with our conversation. So, our first question that is directed to our entire panel asks, what is your impression of the outcomes of COP28 as it relates to the Caribbean? And post COP28, how can we ensure that outputs are implemented in our region to address our unique context? Dainalyn, would you like to start us off?
Okay, sure. And let me just say I'm very excited to be here, and greetings to everyone that's tuning in on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching us from. Thanks so much, Sapphire. And, greetings to my panelists, and big up Derval and Christine for the awesome work. All right. So I think my COP28 experience, as a disclaimer, I think maybe it weighs more on my experience versus my perspective. But if I should share my perspective as it relates to the Caribbean, it's a mixed bag. So for me, I felt like even from a country perspective, I wouldn't particularly say that the Jamaican presence was very heavy, but I did see a lot of encouraging forms of collaboration and networking. And what I love is that, we continue to push for progress. I saw a lot of momentum building in relation to, the collective that were at several Caribbean pavilions and so forth. But I'm really trying to structure my thoughts here because they're running away in my mind. So many things to pick at. So in some cases, it was very encouraging to see some governments use this opportunity at COP, to drive momentum, launching campaigns for sustainability. I recall Bahamas, the St. Kitts and Nevis and Barbados, I think, have launched some initiatives as it relates to furthering their green energy agenda. And that is encouraging. I know a lot of persons, we not just as a Caribbean collective, but certainly for vulnerable states and other small island countries, the win as it relates to loss and damage, still a far cry from where we ought to be. Over 700 million mobilized or committed, out of the 420 billion that is actually needed. That Auntie Mia, the Auntie of the Caribbean, Prime Minister of Barbados, has often echoed that that's nowhere near enough. And I think, the big question mark that continues to hang over the issues of loss and damage, and over the issues of funding being meted out to Caribbean islands and other small island developing states is, how will this work? And I think that question continues to be relevant as we dissect issues of climate change, specifically climate justice, because who will benefit, who will be considered when we really drill down and work out a feasible mechanism to implement and operationalize loss and damage funds. So another thing, though, from the Caribbean perspective, I really have to make mention, the biggest impression for me was how active Caribbean youth were on the ground. That was a very proud moment for me. And I say that because I may not be a COP veteran like my colleague and my sister friend Jhannel and others who might be on this call, but I was at COP 25 and I remember participating in a discussion and even in other global fora where I am the only Caribbean person in the room. And it meant so much, to see the representation still not where it needs to be, but very encouraging. Some of the countries made efforts to include youth as part of their delegation. It may not have been at the decision tables, but they were there being very close to national dialogues. And I saw youth standing on business. I saw youth promoting awareness, and I saw youth building connections, all in the name of climate change and climate justice. And that for me was important. Being part of so many networks on the Caribbean, part of the GirlsCARE mentorship group, and having these opportunities to have purposeful panel discussions and conversations, not the sharing the cliched perspectives on climate justice and climate change, but we're able to show a Caribbean example of young people being on the front lines of climate change, and we were able to share this roadmap or share where we have come, because I remember our African colleagues, our Asian colleagues learning from us, seeing the model that a GirlsCARE had built as it relates to mentorship for girls. I recall being a part of a forum where I have my other colleagues who were sharing examples of where they were in eco-entrepreneurship, the work that they're doing in the blue economy, and sharing the journey, the steps that they've taken to access finance as young people who are trying to build viable, sustainable businesses, not just to further themselves, but also to even build out policy platforms to help vulnerable socioeconomic groups in Jamaica and the Caribbean. So those are the things that I was really inspired for. And if I should, before I wind down this question, but even myself, it was a great opportunity. I wore several hats being at COP, being able to be a part of the World Farmers Organization through the Jamaica network for rural women producers, to amplify the Caribbean experience, and also to amplify the reason gender justice is important in the context of climate action, and to spotlight the need for rural women, the challenges we face as it relates to access to land, skills, opportunities, and all of those things, and to be able to come to different spaces, participate in collaborations, and to put forward recommendations. That was great. So I think on the ground level, it was very great, because people ask me, what do you think? I've met so many African colleagues, and they're saying, what do you think about this COP being held in Dubai, the controversy? And I was like, you know what? COP has been held 28 times if we're going by the number. And what we really should focus on is the integrity on the ground, the local grass movement, the grassroots movement, the movers and shakers. And for me, that was my biggest impression, because we can write the speeches for the global leaders and the regional leaders. What you're going to tell we say 1.5 to stay alive, we know that. Caribbean region is vulnerable, we know that. So I love the fact that there was a lot of purposeful engagement from the Caribbean youth demography for COP28, and I was pleased to be a part of it, and I was proud to observe it.
Thank you so much for that, Dainalyn. And I definitely echo that sentiment that a lot of the value and the power of COP has to do with the grassroots movement and the youth movements that have that opportunity to connect and collaborate on the ground. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. I especially took that point of young people standing on business at COP. So thank you so much for spotlighting that for us. Over to you, Rehanna, if you'd like to share for us what your experience is.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here, the host and co-host. I attended COP28 as an Indigenous delegate, and was part of the Indigenous Peoples Movement And I can tell you it was hectic and confusing. Even though it was my second, it took me a while to grow in. Being an Indigenous person, you're figuring out ways on how to get into certain meetings, how to have your voice heard, and all of that. But what came out most was the family, the togetherness of Indigenous peoples there, and the advocacy that we push together to have our voices heard, to have our rights recognized in some of the text. And even though, as I'm given just a personal thing and then go into the Caribbean, that the outcome was not what we had initiated at the start, but because some of our rights were left out. Yes, they do recognize Indigenous peoples, but they do not recognize our rights when it comes to projects being done in the name of climate change and all of that. So generally, and for the Caribbean, there were several topics discussed at COP28, like loss and damage, the climate finance, transition away from fossil fuels, and what's not. And so what this means for the Caribbean is that the access to loss and damage fund is, we should say, it's on its way to accelerate and to implement those losses that occurred, especially for those like hurricanes, for example, hurricane-prone countries. This fund means that it can assist those countries in some way to, with the climate change efforts. And the transition away from fossil fuels and means that those oil and gas countries will now be able to push forward towards the green economy, what they call it, the green economy. And so there is somewhat of a hope for the future. But again, the work is now for us to ensure, the people on the ground, to ensure that we engage with policymakers, we advocate, and this is a good start. This is one way to start. And this, it to push in our agenda. And if I can come to our recent Guyana meetup, thanks to Christine, hearing people's perspective, I was like, it was a diverse group of people meeting, and hearing their perspectives, I was like, this is why we need this movement. Because yes, I may not know of one area, and I may know about a lot in one area. And so hearing the different perspectives, I was able to understand and gain more about the gender aspect of climate justice. And so that is it. When that's my overall impression of COP28. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of community, and it's also bringing the element of what it was like for you as an Indigenous person and your experience amplifying that work in the space. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I do really, again, want to highlight the work that they're doing with the Truth Be Told campaign and in fostering that community for us to have dialogues and to explore all of these other issues that intersect with climate justice. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to hand over to Jhannel to share with us what her experience was like at COP28 this year.
Thank you so much, Sapphire. And also thank you to Dainalyn and Rehanna for sharing their experiences. I think I echo pretty much of what has been said. So I attended COP in the capacity of a member of the Global Fund for Women's Feminist MLA, and that's the feminist movement-led approach to climate justice that is being embarked on in the Caribbean. And so GirlsCARE, as one of the members of that committee, we were afforded the opportunity to be able to attend and also to be able to be in fellowship and in communication with our fellow sisters who are also a part of the African MLA. And I think there are so many different things that happened. As has been said in so many different spaces, COP was massive, it was huge. There were so many, higher level deliberations that were happening. But I think Dainalyn said it quite well when she said, the grassroots connections are those that resonate the most with persons. They are the ones where, we've gotten so used to these kind of settings, sitting behind a screen and, interacting. And while we do recognize the importance of these kind of engagements, I don't think anything beats that kind of face-to-face sitting, listening, hearing experiences, hearing stories, hearing how persons have fought and continue to fight. And I think one of the things that has resonated with me is the fact that there's so many women, young women, mature women, individuals who identify as women who are at the forefront of this work. But when we look at the financing, when we look at the resources, when we look at where power lies in relation to these kind of resources, we recognize that not many of it lies within these communities and within these spaces. And so I think one of the key takeaways for me from COP was that women continue to be at the helm, continue to be the movers and shakers in their communities, in their households, in the different spaces that they occupy with little to no resources. Then can you imagine what we would be able to do if we were only able to get a fragment or a portion of some of those funds and resources that we do think would be put to great use, particularly when we think about climate change, when we think about climate justice, when we think about gender justice and how intersecting so many of these issues are. I think for me as well, seeing how despite, you know, the different regions that we reside in, how similar issues are and how the similar challenges that we have to confront, that despite these challenges, we still seek to rise above and seek to create space for change. I think, you know, all of these continue to resonate with me, with the work that we continue to do through GirlsCARE. And it shows us that, you know, irrespective of how often you feel like giving up, irrespective of how often you feel like, or you don't see the kind of change that you are hoping for, and you feel like you're putting in all this effort and the change isn't as grand as you want it to be, you recognize that in other spaces, individuals are making incremental and small steps that eventually lead, you know, to change. And I think the other day, being in a session with one of our sister allies as well, Michaela Loach, she spoke to the idea of ecosystems and how ecosystems that are not necessarily visible to the naked eye, but, you know, are working in the background or working underneath the surface, are still able to create fruit and are still able to facilitate change at the end of the day. I think that's what keeps us motivated. That's what keeps us going. And at the end of the day, we have to remain, you know, steadfast in the work that we do, because if not us, as we continue to say, then who?
Definitely. That's extremely powerful. I really love that anecdote of the ecosystems that work beneath the surface. And something that I want to highlight that each of you would have touched on is that idea of funding and financing that is so necessary to support the work of women within the climate movement. We were talking a lot about the Loss and Damage Fund. That was a big part of the discussion at COP28 last year. So leading into the next question, we're asking about 1 to 2 specific policy actions that you would like to see implemented to support climate and gender justice in the Caribbean. This is a general question to the panel. Yeah, of course, definitely.
So if I can go first. So gender mainstreaming and climate policies have always been put on a back pedal, and so leaders need to have this a positive outlook towards having this on the front pedal, to understand how important climate and gender justice goes hand in hand. And so one policy I can think of is one action that is capacity building, which is an important aspect of, you know, empowering persons and to have them be included in the intersectionality of gender and climate change. And so they should touch organizations, the civil society organizations, in capacity building, so that, you know, the more people are empowered, the more others can become aware, and we have this movement going. That is just one way I can think of a policy that can, you know, be effective in this area of work.
Thank you so much, Rehanna. Dainalyn, would you like to go next?
Okay, all right, sure. I was gonna let Jhannel, because I spoke first the last time, but that's fine. One of the things I didn't get to also highlight, which I loved as well, it touched back on the part of your question from COP28, was really have to give kudos to CANARI, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, and how they also use COP28 as a place to launch their impactful campaign, the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, and the agenda, the resilience agenda. And I know that our organizers here are also a part, and our panelists are also a part of that movement. And I think it speaks to the kind of leadership and mobilizing that we want to see, where you don't come to these world stages just asking perspectives anymore, especially when you're experts in the room. How can you capitalize on the momentum on behalf of the region that you are from? So I thought that was very impressive or commendable, I should say. Going back to the policies that I'd like to see as it relates to gender and climate justice. I mentioned before that, I went to COP as part of the Jamaica Network for Rural Women Producers. And even recently, we would have received an award from the Canadian High Commission for the work in empowering rural women economically. And I think some of the policy directions in relation to climate and gender justice needs to really target cooperatives or the mobilizing of female groups, and not just female, because I also acknowledge that we tend to look at gender justice in a homogeneous context, women, and there are even levels when we think about the social disparity, the economic disparity, education level, and all of that. So it's also about policies that deconstruct the homogeneity of women and other vulnerable groups, the LGBTQ plus community. So we need to have more targeted policies that provide resource support and mobilizing for them. And I think you had asked why. And like I said, going back to my experience and my time with the organization, we had a gender violence workshop sometime last year. And I was very happy that, the facilitator really was very layered in how she explained the different kinds of abuse. Gender-based violence doesn't just look like women and other people and other groups getting a black eye, or getting punched down and sliding downstairs. What it really, what it also imparted to me was the financial abuse or economic abuse that are meted out to women. So a lot of times you will ask, why don't they leave? And I'm talking about women who are pursuing rural livelihoods as well, nature-based livelihoods. So the climate, there's an intersection here happening with climate change and climate justice. And you have where here are women who are trying to secure their economic independence, and their male counterparts or partners in the household are sabotaging that effort because they want them to continue being financially dependent on them. And I say that we need policies that target female organizations or the establishment of more cooperatives, so that they have a ready market. I see the impact of my friends Jhannel and Aisha will talk about the feminist organizing. So we need that in the business community for our food producers, for our agriculture stakeholders, or persons engaged in other aspects of natural resource-based livelihoods, or any livelihood at all, especially where you intersect with climate change and you're already underrepresented and disenfranchised. Because in that case, where the man can come in and say, okay, don't buy from her because XYZ, then she has another alternative. Her product is somewhere else, and then her economic future is not stumped because of these kinds of abuse that we suffer. So that to me was a very visual and impactful, even though heartbreaking case of how women, no matter we might think people are helpless or people don't want to leave, but how they are being hindered from recognizing their true potential. And we need policies that can navigate around that. I think Christine mentioned in her opening as well, policies that, not policies, but she spoke about the challenge that we have with the availability of gender-specific data in the region. And I think we want more policies to also address that. I remember M. Christie, who was a guest on the Global Yaadie podcast, when we were also looking at climate justice series, and I know they are also featured in the Truth Be Told campaign as well. They taught me about the importance of data justice. when we're conducting research and we do not hold space, or we are not deliberate in also disaggregating the data and the target audience towards other vulnerable groups, then we continue to perpetuate this exclusiveness. How can we plan if people aren't accounted for? How can we make changes when they continue to exclude? So looking at policies that that really seek to have gender disaggregated data, as well as policies that cater towards mobilizing of more economic groups of women, are certainly two things that I love to see unfolding in the Caribbean.
Thank you so much, Dainalyn. So many incredible recommendations coming forward about gender disaggregated data, capacity building, and mobilizing cooperatives of women and gender diverse people. And I just want to quickly highlight an organization from St. Lucia called Helen's Daughter that is doing some of that work in supporting rural women in agriculture, and kind of creating that environment to support cooperatives of women farmers. So over to you, Jhannel, to share.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I think when we think about, the kind of policy actions that need to be taken, we need to recognize how important it is that we seek to integrate policies that address the kind of unique challenges faced by different genders, particularly in the context of a changing climate. And I know we've spoken a bit about financing and access to finance and access to climate finance, but I think something that we need to exert a little bit more, particularly when we think about this kind of work, is gender responsive climate financing. How many governments, how many institutions do we hear talking about how specifically climate financing is being allocated towards responding to issues around gender? And so when we think about it, being able to implement a policy, a plan, a program, whatever it is, that ensures equitable and accessible access to financing, particularly around climate, particularly around gender-related issues, is going to be important, especially if we want to address the unique vulnerabilities and challenges of women and other gender minorities to climate change-related impacts. In doing this as well, we also need to ensure transparency and inclusion around these mechanisms. Dainalyn spoke to the importance of being able to ensure that, initiatives that are women-led, whether businesses, community-based, SMEs, MSMEs, whatever they are, that, there is funding that they have access to, particularly when these seek to create opportunities, particularly when these seek to increase the livelihoods of women and their families, particularly when we seek to recognize that a lot of women are heads of their households, a lot of women are the ones running things in their homes. And so when we create opportunities for them, when we have, funding directed towards them and the activities that they do to care for their homes, we're also, building sustainability into the whole concept. When we also think about the fact that there's so many programs and so many projects that do maybe a one-off project saying that we want to include women, we want 40 or 30% of our beneficiaries to be women. These, are a drop in the bucket, but these are also one-off initiatives. How do we ensure that these remain staples, particularly when we look at our programs and our projects around climate change? It is by ensuring that we have finances allocated specifically to the development, the implementation, the monitoring, and continuity and scaling up of these sorts of initiatives. I think something else that's also going to be important is inclusive climate adaptation planning, with specific attention being paid to gender-related issues. When we think a lot about our climate change adaptation plans, gender is often something that's probably mentioned or tacked on, or you have a section that speaks to why women are vulnerable and why gender needs to be a consideration when we think about climate change related issues. But how in-depth do we really get into a lot of these things? And so ensuring that we, as we say, interweave these kind of considerations throughout our plans, throughout our policies, is going to be important. And not only making it something on paper, not only ensuring that we tick a box, but also having active participation of women in decision-making processes around climate resilience, recognizing their knowledge, their experiences, the fact that, they're not only seen as vulnerable persons, but they're also seen as individuals with solutions, with things that have worked, with things that continue to work. And if given the opportunity, will be able to contribute and to co-create solutions that will work for themselves and their communities. And so that kind of inclusion is going to be important. And of course, establishing mechanisms to address some of the things that Dainalyn mentioned, particularly when we look at gender-based violence risk, particularly around climate disasters, increasingly we recognize that in the face of climate-related disasters, stressors, all these different impacts, we recognize that oftentimes women end up becoming involved in gender-based violence-related issues. And so how we create space for the provision of safe spaces, ensuring services are available, ensuring that vulnerable groups during emergencies are able to access the kind of resources that they need, particularly when their households are not necessarily safe for them during these kind of events, are also going to be important. So I think when we look at it, it's going to be around inclusive adaptation planning, recognizing the kind of challenges that women and minority groups face in the event of climate-related disasters, and also making sure that we allocate specific financing to be able to address some of these issues that are particularly unique to minority groups, including women.
Thank you so much for that, Jhannel. Inclusive adaptation planning, and especially like that note of making sure that women and gender diverse people are not just considered as victims or people who are vulnerable to the climate crisis. Yes, recognizing that, but also making sure to acknowledge that they are co-creators of climate justice solutions. I really just want to circle back really quickly to that point of funding and financing that we've been speaking about repeatedly throughout this conversation, and a really brilliant question came from one of our participants, Michaela Hussein, asks, what has been your experience or challenges in your relationships with funders? I'm going to leave that open to the floor. If you'd like to take the question, you can go ahead.
I will respond at this point. So we have been involved in this kind of advocacy and climate work for some time. And I must say, initially, accessing funding had been a challenge. I know it still remains a challenge, but I must say, I think one of the things that has contributed to us being able to tap a little bit more now into funding is based on the kind of work that we have done. So GirlsCARE, through our mentorship program that was initially funded by Frida. So we had received funding from Frida, the Feminist Fund, to be able to kickstart that first year of our mentorship program. And then over time, because of the visibility that came from the program, I'd like to say that other funders started recognizing our work. In some cases, they reached out to us. In some cases where we reached out, they were already familiar with the work. And so I would say being able to tap into funding has not been one of the easier things to do, but I think the more visible the work becomes is the more likely funders are to support your work, particularly if it aligns well with the mandate that they have. With the Global Fund for Women, I would say Aisha has been doing a lot of work in the space. And so Aisha would have been able to engage with the Global Fund for Women in the development of this idea for the movement-led approach around feminism and climate justice in the Caribbean. And so now we are seeking to create that kind of inclusive and participatory funding mechanism where we are reaching out to groups, institutions across the Caribbean that are doing work at the intersection of gender and climate justice, and seeing how best we can support them with a lot of their core activities, but more so also being able to continue their work. And so I would say that while, it's in the initial stages, I do see this as an opportunity, as a space for persons to be able to tap into a lot of what has been done and continues to be done in the space, but also to be able to expand. And so just to answer the question, I think individuals' experiences will differ, but I do know that it still remains one of the biggest challenges that groups face. And oftentimes it's just that a funder will reach out to say, we want to support you. In other cases, you'll apply and you recognize that the funding probably is small to begin with. You recognize that there are other challenges and issues, but I would say that increasingly there are groups, there are institutions, Open Society Foundations, for example, that's doing work in the Caribbean. And so I will say that it varies, but because the climate justice movement is one that's also growing, I see where there may be space for more funders coming in, more support being provided, and more groups being able to benefit.
Thank you so much for that, Jhannel. Yes.
So, so some of what I'm about to share may not necessarily be my individual experience, but certainly from, being a part of groups and even conversations with some of my climate colleagues, I want to contribute to that question about the experience and challenges with relationships with funders. So I think, especially where climate change is concerned in the Caribbean, and Jhannel alluded to that in much of her response to, where grant funding is a very common stream of financial support for a lot of groups to further their endeavors and efforts respectively. And even though you have organizations that may be well versed with accessing grant funding, it can be challenging for others depending on, their newness, sometimes even the capacity of that organization and the leadership, and simply even intimidation. Sometimes you have in rural contexts and so forth, and certain farming groups and community-based organizations, they see a call for grants being issued, and the document might look so scary to them. So that is a current and present challenge, where some persons believe that they don't have the capacity to submit a grant application. And there has been lots of responses to that, where you have a lot of grant writing workshops, and those things continue to be encouraged so that people can understand that the application is not the months and they can get over that hill. But another perspective that started to loom largely in front of me was a conversation with a fellow eco entrepreneur in the space and climate advocate, where their organization is really trying to though they're pursuing grant funding, some of the other there were other challenges that they had shared with me. So I'm just trying to gauge, because I don't know how personal or deep I should go, but there are a lot of considerations sometimes, and the requirements that funders sometimes have in order to provide. So while it can be a good cause, and they see the sustainable elements, even this person, they were sharing with me that the funders had reservations because they did not see them, the head of the organization, very visible in the media space and so on social media. And sometimes even just criterion such as that can hold people back as it relates to funding. Sometimes even the policy environment in the Caribbean. So especially this person's business, where they are trying to, there's an opportunity for them to capitalize of carbon credits that can be of benefit to their country and the Caribbean, but the policy infrastructure is not there, so that they can effectively proceed. And sometimes when you're trying to go for a certain high level funding, that can hinder the progress and the process. So there are so many other things to consider as well, in terms of the age of the organization, or the experience of the organization, and the nature of the kind of funding that you're trying to secure, and the criteria that the funders may have. And even for some persons in the youth space, sometimes you have the common challenge of them not looking at a business in a very serious way, or an effort in a serious way, because of young people. And I mean, we should be beyond that, but those are some of the realities as well.
Thank you so much for that, Dainalyn. And I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying as it relates to, these unique and nuanced challenges that we experience here in the Caribbean as relates to funding and financing. And that's why there's such a need for a context-specific approach when persons approach to provide financing. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Rehanna, if you'd like to respond to that question.
Hi, yes. So I'm not associated or affiliated with an organization per se. However, having heard and engaged in conversations regarding funding to grassroots organizations and communities as it relates to Indigenous peoples, Indigenous peoples have been at the forefront and facing the brunt of climate change impacts. And so the stories they've shared is that the accessing finance and grants, it somewhat becomes filtered down. So you hear of the large funding being allocated at the global level, then it filters down to the regional level, comes to the national level, the country level, and then to the local level, which is the grassroots communities, which those pushing the work. And it is difficult for them because what they get is just a meager sum of what was already given at the top. So how impactful their work should be isn't that it depends on the funding they get. So so far it has been negative, and as part of the global movement as Indigenous peoples, there have been calls for Indigenous peoples to have access to fundings, and one of their, well, the policy leader reasons were that Indigenous peoples lack the capacity to handle these funds, and which was an insult because we have a lot of work being done, but we are not getting that access. And so then there was a call for what about capacity building, and my other panelists mentioned that there are workshops for grant funding and grant writing and all of that, and how do we get access to that when we come to Indigenous communities and we have no access to internet and what's not, and there is like a lot more behind all of that. And so far the experiences I've seen and heard is that it has been negative so far. But again, we are, as the Indigenous Peoples Movement, we are pushing forward to have that access so that we can propel our efforts towards the climate change efforts.
Thanks so much, Rehanna, for highlighting these harmful stereotypes and challenges that are impacting funding for Indigenous communities. I just want to pivot really quickly for our next question, talking about the Truth Be Told campaign, which is why we're all here this evening. So this next question asks us, what is the value of the Truth Be Told campaign? Do you think it is an effective way to promote awareness and action on the connection between gender and climate justice? Is it okay if I start with you, Dainalyn?
Sure. Well, truth be told, I do think it's an excellent initiative, an excellent campaign. Any initiative that, continues to drive awareness and to have conversations on multiple levels to engage different audiences is always welcome. We have the constant teething pain of persons feeling that climate action, climate change, climate justice is for a particular penny section. It's this otherness, but it's everyone. It affects everything. And I think that's what we've constantly have been trying to showcase through different communication formats and different engagement activities across the region, whether individually or collaboratively. And I think, the Truth Be Told campaign is just that example that this is not finite. This work is not finite. It's continuous, and we always have to find new ways of tapping into audiences, inspiring perspectives. And in reflecting on that question, when you asked, it's supposed to challenge, to confront, and to change. So especially for people who are now, easing into the conversation, whether it's through the podcast that the climate conscious have promoted through this effort, if it's the blogs that they're reading, if it's a social media campaign, and we have the stories, we have the experiences from the experts, from the activists, from people who are living the impacts of climate change and who understand and are able to articulate in so many different ways what it means, climate and gender justice. I think, it's supposed to challenge persons who never thought about things a particular way. And it's supposed to confront, to ask, how am I being affected? How can I be a part of the change? And it's supposed to spark something in you. And I think, you can never stop having these kinds of conversations. You can never hear it too much, see it too much, because we're not stopping living our experiences. So I do believe that it's well targeted, it's timely, and it's needed, and it's very much relevant, especially for us. Truth be told, if we're not telling our stories, who will tell it for us?
Definitely agree with all of that, and I think another aspect that really jumps out at me as well, and it's something that is linked to a little bit of what we were discussing earlier about how women have always been at the forefront of the climate movement, but their voices have not always been heard. I think that campaigns like this allow us to have this record of the work that this generation of women and gender diverse people have been doing to challenge and to support gender and climate justice. So I think it's really, really incredible, this campaign. What these incredible people are doing. Over to you, Rehanna, for your thoughts.
This campaign has been great overall. I was not aware of it, and I saw a post on Instagram, the sponsored post, and I was like, interesting, because as an individual, personally, I did not I understood the climate and gender part, especially when it comes to women only. And as an Indigenous youth who, have been living and facing the impact of climate change. And so it personally, it changed my perspective, understanding more on the gender aspect, that is. And so, yes, it has impacted me, and it is a great, great, great movement. And so I know that there are others out there like me as well, who not only learn from this, but will continue, or have been given that push to continue the work of the climate climate and gender justice out there in the Caribbean and worldwide. And so the promotion of the campaign online and even in person, in a digitally verse world now, it is really important to keep up with, the trends and what's not, and to have that going. And the one example I can think of was the recent, an example is like, I am Guyanese. I love my chicken curry and roti. And one of the campaigners at the forefront was like, how about we do this as well? You say whatever you want to say as it relates to climate and gender justice. And, it was able to build up views because it was a going trend then. And, to have that campaign going on and using your creativity into that, it has had great impact so far. And yeah, that is my thought, as it has impacted me individually, and, a broader impact as well. So I know it is not just only for me, but as I said, for everyone else.
Thank you so much, Rehanna, for highlighting that. I love that you brought up this idea that, in the climate movement, we're constantly learning, we're always learning new things, and campaigns like this allow us to widen our perspectives and our understanding. I just want to quickly highlight another question from the audience. Camille asks, what are some of the best practices recommended for engaging women and LGBTQ+ community members in inclusive climate action planning to advance gender and climate justice?
I feel like the simple question, well, the first thought that comes to mind is to include them. So best practices recommended for engaging, it's to reach out to them directly. So maybe as a rule of thumb, it's simply this: if you're making plans, if you're developing a campaign, whether it's a consultation, the consultation process should not be happening without them. And it's also, Camille, maybe to seek opportunities to allow them to lead and, to co-develop solutions. So as long as we're not taking a prescriptive approach in deciding what an audience needs when we're not a part of that audience or not part of that community, then I do think we can make real progress in advancing gender and climate justice. So think about, what is your beginning? What is your starting point? And our LGBTQ plus people and our women being included from that starting point, then I think we are onto a better path.
Definitely engaging young people and gender diverse women and gender diverse are as experts in their own lived experience, definitely, and engaging them as such. Rehanna, would you like to add to that question? Not a problem. Would you like to reiterate the question?
Yes. Yeah, I got it. Sorry.
Okay, not a problem.
Yeah, the best practices, as my other panelists said, is to include everyone in the policy making when it comes to decision making processes, because again, from an Indigenous person perspective, and overall, I guess it happens the same, because I can only speak for a certain sector based on my experience, that we are always put on the back pedal. Yes, we are sometimes, yes, they say Indigenous peoples are rights holders, but do they recognize our rights when policies are put into place? And that can only happen when we are also placed at the decision making table. We are seen as partners into forming solutions, and when it comes to consultations, we must be always our right to free, prior, and informed consent must always be respected, which has always been, I can speak for Guyana's case, not not a good practice so far for Indigenous peoples, as you know, the policymakers are not have not been respecting that right for Indigenous peoples, and so it is important, again, as I said, to have Indigenous peoples and other sectors, other marginalized genders at the decision making table, to have our voices heard and to have better solutions in place. Because what solutions are there when we do not have the people who are most impacted and would give better solutions than what they are putting out there, and we can have a better world if it's at that.
Thank you so much for that, Rehanna. One of our last questions asks, why do you stand for climate and gender justice? Would you like to start us off, Rehanna?
Hi, yes. Again, when I got this question, I could ponder for long, because it just hit me that, you know, why do I stand for it as an Indigenous person? You are born into fighting for your rights, your land rights, your territories, everything. You are just born as an advocate, and so why do I stand for climate and gender justice? Is because it has impacted me, my family, my community, and all Indigenous peoples, not only in Guyana but globally. And so it's the intersectionality of identities that has risen out most for me, and the disproportionate impacts of climate change on Indigenous communities, as we are facing threats, continue to face threats of biodiversity loss, our cultural loss, our traditional way of life. And so it is closely linked, climate justice is closely linked to our preservation of Indigenous peoples' cultures. And without our cultures, without our solutions, Mother Earth would not be here. Without our sustainable way of living, as we have continued to live for many years, and we continue to carry on the knowledge, sustainable practices, the knowledge of our elders, our ancestors, and we continue to carry on that knowledge, and we'll share it with the young ones, the upcoming generation, and they would carry on that knowledge. And even though our voices may not be heard, or we may not be as placed on the forefront, we will continue, we will not deter. And that is why climate and gender justice is something that I stand for and will continue to stand for as an Indigenous youth.
Thank you so much, Rehanna. Over to you, Dainalyn.
Thanks, Sapphire, and thanks, Rehanna, for that response. I mean, I don't even have to go into the technical reason. And I think Christine in her opening mentioned, and we know historically women and other groups being disproportionately impacted for climate change. But I take it personal, and I'll keep it simple because I've been so extended in my responses from before. But I am from a rural community, and I am a girl, a woman. I identify as a woman. So I know what it is like being from a rural community and being a woman when opportunities aren't made available to you. And I also know what it is like when you're from a rural community and being a woman and opportunities are made available for you. And I think when we lean towards that positive intersection, the opportunities being made available, the transformative change that can happen, for far too long, it's about, we in the Caribbean, we're known, given our history, as persons who have been fighting against oppression. And in the context of climate change, we are being oppressed. There are so many ironies or stark contrasts. Why is it that we speak about the young girls who are, who are more active in the climate space, the women who make up a more significant proportion of persons who are fighting for climate change, yet it is that we continue to be disenfranchised. Just recently we saw where COP29, their climate summit committee was initially announced with no women, coming off the backs of a COP28 where 63%, I think, of that same group were women. So it's regressive, and it goes to show why we have to continue to stand. Because I think about this analogy, while I am not yet a parent, I babysat, there might be people who are parents or your own children all the time as an educator or whatever role. And I've experienced needing to give a child an instruction for 6 days of the week. And if you don't tell them the 7th day, you think that not telling them the 7th day, now they'll eventually realize and do. But it's like if one day goes by and you say nothing, it goes back to square one. And I feel that's exactly what's happening in the climate space, where if we don't continue to vocalize, if we don't continue to agitate or push for change, it's like it goes back to square one. And that's exactly what's happening. So I think that's exactly the reason I continue to stand for climate and gender justice, because it's not finite. And, if you're a part of this fight, you just have to decide to be committed, because for things to change, we have to keep at it.
Definitely. This work continues always. I just want to say thank you so much to the both of you for such an incredible conversation. We're not closing just yet. But as we transition to our last question for the evening, I just wanted to quickly say thank you before we go into that one. I think I share the same sentiment as the majority, as all of our audience members, in that I've been able to learn so much and be so inspired by the work that y'all have done and what y'all have expressed during this time. So just for us to wrap up this segment of this evening's proceedings, I just want to ask y'all if y'all have any advice that y'all would like to share or impart on any member of the audience who may be here tonight, a young woman, a young LGBTQ plus person who is just starting their climate journey. If you have any word of advice from your own experience or something that you have seen that you would like to impart on them before we close, I think I would definitely want to give you all that opportunity to do that now.
So I'll go first. Thank you for that question. So anyone out there, one of the key aspects of engaging or being an advocate of that is to build that community, have a community, because this work is not done in solidarity. You need a lot of support, and even if it's just one person is enough to have your back. And that is one aspect I can think of, that without that community to be pushing you forward, without that support and without that motivation, it becomes difficult. And so to have that community, a positive community, and even a negative one, because you can come across critics all the time, but do not be disheartened at the comment. There will always be critics, but without those critics, you cannot get elsewhere. Use that as a motivation. So push forward with your work and network, and go forward with your work. As I said, networking is also an important aspect. Network. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rehanna. Over to you, Dainalyn.
All right. So, as a self-proclaimed wordsmith, I am going to pull inspiration from the theme of this campaign, the name of this campaign, Truth Be Told. So, my advice to people who are listening is embrace the truth that should be told. Be bold. So it's either you find the way that you are most comfortable or you think it's most needed to tell your truth, or help others to tell their truth. So if it's one or the other or a combination of both, ensure that we continue to represent the reality and own and hone the power of our stories, your story.
I absolutely love that. That has been such incredible advice. And I think just to close us off, to add some of my own advice, my own experience, I'm pretty young and also pretty new to the movement. So it may not but
you're not a child, but
Yeah. I think for me, definitely, I echo a lot of what has already been said. I think as young people, we can tend to forget that we are experts in our own lived experience, and there is truth and there is power in your experience as a young person, specifically a young person from the Caribbean. I would say, never let someone speak over your truth. When you advocate, never ever feel small in a space, because what you have to say matters and is important and it's necessary. I think don't shy away from criticism. I think Rehanna touched on that in her response as well. Criticism is how you grow in your advocacy and in your movement, and it's how you are able to dissect the ideas that you believe in and grow to be stronger in them, and get rid of the ones that may not be as beneficial. I think in addition to that, community is so important. Spaces like these are so important. Connecting with your peers and learning from your peers in your advocacy journey. You can't do anything without community. And then last but certainly not least, focusing on your mental health and taking time to care for yourself is extremely important. You can't pour from an empty cup. So always take that time to care for yourself. And with that, brings us to the end of this evening's fireside chat. This has been an incredible conversation full of valuable lessons about climate and gender justice, reflections on COP28, conversations on financing, and really brilliant advice. I'd like to express my gratitude to our speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge with us and for all of their incredible climate justice work. A huge thank you to the team for allowing me to moderate this evening's conversation. A huge thank you to you, the audience, who have been patiently listening to all that we have been here imparting to you. So without further ado, I'd like to transition over to Christine, who will be taking us through to the next segment of this evening's proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sapphire. What an inspirational conversation, and what an inspirational way to close off our January, the first month of 2024. I want to say thank you for your work, all of you. Thank you for your words and your perspective. Thank you for your experience and your expertise, because that's what you are. You're all experts in everything that you've shared with us. Thank you for sharing your experiences at COP and for your work on the ground. Rehanna, I'm so glad I'm able to share my home and my love for Guyana with you. And Jhannel, thank you so much for always being an inspiration. Thank you for your kindness and your leadership. And Dainalyn, you have been with us from the very start of our first conference, the first planning session of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference. Your work on the ground with rural women is much needed, and your voice is definitely a gift to all of us. Thank you so much for speaking and representing us in the Caribbean. And I can't thank Sapphire enough for moderating this conversation. Sapphire, for just being you, for being passionate and always so willing to help us. And I look forward to the day when I can actually meet you in person. It feels as though I've known you my whole life, but I look forward to the day when we actually get to meet in person. We admire you all so much, and words can't express what it means to be in community with all of you, to share the struggle with all of you. I want to remind you, as Angela Davis reminded us, it is not only about the intersectionality of our identities, but the intersectionalities of our struggles. I hope you can look at this campaign as a source of rich knowledge from our Caribbean people. I hope that you can draw information from our work that we've been doing for the last 2 months, but more so the last 2 conferences. We are trying extremely hard to create this rich community, and we encourage you to be a part of it and take ownership. Another amazing aspect of this campaign is the art aspect that we were able to combine into this work. And again, I'm going to pass it over to Simone, who has been with us from the very beginning as well, to share her experience judging these amazing pieces that we were able to receive from all across the Caribbean.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks to the team for putting on such an amazing campaign, and thanks to the panelists and the moderators for such an enriching discussion. On behalf of the judges for the art competition, I would just briefly like to say we were so quite inspired by all the entries. It was just simply amazing to be able to experience it digitally, all the submissions from all over the Caribbean, and it just speaks to how regional this movement is beginning to be and will continue to be and has potential to flourish into. So it was really, really just so inspiring, all of the pieces. And before I announce the winner, we'd like to highlight all of the submissions that we received. Again, thank you so much to all the persons who entered and submitted their art. And with that, the winner for the Truth Be Told's Caribbean Art for Change competition is Lindsay Collins from Jamaica. Congratulations to Lindsay and to all of the entrants. Thank you, Simone, and congrats to our winner, and also congrats to all our entrants for participating. If we're in person, we'd all be clapping, so I want to see some clapping emojis in the chat as we celebrate all the participants in the Caribbean Art for Change competition, and we especially highlight our winner. We were really blown away by the high quality of submissions, as Simone shared, and also for the overall engagement throughout the Truth Be Told campaign over the past 2 months. Truth Be Told would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. I must say thank you to Dr. Ayinka Grandison of Canary, the resilience lead at Canary, and also Mr. Oro Fraser, the Caribbean lead for OSF. We are especially grateful to our campaign partners. 16 organizations from across the region endorsed the campaign and helped us to share our key messages. And we look forward to maintaining this community and furthering our collaborations moving forward. Thank you to the persons that wrote blogs and were interviewed for the campaign, as well as our moderators and panelists for both the opening and closing fireside chats. Thank you to Paula Joseph and the Market Aid team for the amazing content creation and social media marketing for this campaign. Truth Be Told is a partnership, is a collaboration between the Climate Conscious Podcast and the Breadfruit Collective as part of our roles in the Gender Working Group under the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. So I have to thank Christine for what has been a very fruitful partnership. Thank you to the audience for engaging with us. Every like, share, comment is appreciated. We have one final request. As we started with a pre-campaign survey, we are ending with a post-campaign survey. So we encourage you to take part in the survey. The survey is live now, and we'll drop the links in the chat. It will remain open for 1 week. And we're asking for your support in getting the word out so that we can have a representative sample that reflects the wider Caribbean region. You can also find the links to the survey in our social media, on our social media profiles. So please share and help us get the word out so that we can collect data, so that we can have data-driven insights, and our advocacy going forward would be informed by data. The campaign is over, but the work of climate and gender justice in the Caribbean continues. Let's continue to be committed to advancing this work in the region. Look out for the campaign reports and other initiatives that will follow. As Dainalyn said, challenge, confront, and drive change. Stay connected, be informed, and take action to build a sustainable, resilient, and just Caribbean. So with that, I thank you all, and I wish you a good night.